welcome. My name is Lexi Laban. I'm the Executive Director of the Jewish Film Institute, the presenter of the San Francisco Jewish Film Festival, and I'm pleased to welcome you to the Synagogue, our venue here on Main Street in Park City, Utah. I want to thank Sundance for inviting JFI to be back here as a partner for the third year in a row. I really miss trudging around in the snow. I never thought I would say that with all of you, but a silver lining of this year's wonderful online festival is that we can invite such a much larger global audience to join us. So welcome to all of you tuning in from all over the world. JFI is hosting 3 different conversations during this year's festival. After today's panel, How to Finish a Film During a Pandemic, we're hosting a wonderful conversation facilitated by former senior programmer here at Sundance, Caroline Labresco, who's also struck out on her own as an independent producer and consultant. She'll be hosting a conversation called Engines of Truth, featuring really some of the most accomplished Jewish women nonfiction filmmakers working in the field today. They'll talk about their body of work, their extraordinary body of work, and the impact that it's having in the world, as well as their own personal journeys and identity. So I hope you can join us for that. And then following the world premiere of Misha and the Wolves here at Sundance on Sunday the 31st, we'll have a conversation at 3 o'clock with Harry Vaughn, senior programmer here at Sundance, and the director of the film Misha and the Wolves, Sam Hobkinson. I hope you'll get a chance to see the film. It's a really well-crafted film about storytelling and truth, and the conversation with Harry is just really wonderful. So for those of you who don't know about JFI, we host the San Francisco Jewish Film Festival, and we just celebrated our 40th anniversary. The call for entries is now open, so for those filmmakers out there, please submit your films to the festival, and we plan to move forward with some kind of online hybrid festival in July. We also have an upcoming Winterfest, February 25th to 28th, and I hope you'll all sign up for our newsletter at jfi.org to get announcements. Some of those programs are available nationally, and definitely all the conversations with artists are, so I hope you can join us for that. Last year at the Sundance Film Festival, we opened the call for entries for our inaugural completion grants program. And this program is the only Jewish content grants program in the country. It really supports filmmakers working with Jewish themes. And by Jewish, I mean the full spectrum of Jewish themes, the full diversity of Jewish identity. And we awarded grants to 6 wonderful projects, and you'll be hearing from the filmmakers of those projects here today. We are opening our second call for entries on the completion grants program here today. So if you have a film that has a rough cut, it needs to be in its rough cut stages of post-production, and you think that it meets the criteria for Jewish content or Jewish content, please submit your films. And when in doubt, just give us a call and we can talk to you about your project. So today's filmmakers, these recipients of our inaugural completion grants, really have worked against extraordinary odds this year during a pandemic to finish their films. And many of the filmmakers have in fact finished their films and released them to the world. And some of them are really finding innovative new ways to complete post-production. So I think you'll find today's panel full of silver linings and enduring practices that may exist beyond this moment in history. And so I'm really thrilled to be able to present this panel today. It will be facilitated by our very own programmer, Joshua Moore. And before we start in today, let's take a look at the clips from this wonderful work. And then I hope you enjoy the panel discussion. Thank you.
Dear Meatmaster 500, I read your ad and have reason to believe I am the woman you are looking for.
Sie ist eine Weinberger Girl. Sie ist 43 jung. Das ist kein Kinder. Kann man nicht gewinnen divorced. Das ist ein Masche von
Wir sind auf dem Markt, ja?
Jetzt ist auch ein ältere Bucher.
I like the idea of being tied up. I also like speech restrictions, pet play, humiliation, corner time, mental bondage, and...
Yitzhak! What are you doing here?
Was geht vor, Itzig?
I've just been struggling with some feelings.
There's holding a ferry up. It's in the early morning now. They had the ferry running just to take me across the river. So when we get across the river, I really figured their intention was on killing me. To myself, I said, if something gonna happen, I'm gonna die defending myself.
We celebrated Irvy's last birthday on August 24th, 2003. She was 97 years old.
She really came alive when she was with people. Left alone, there was some torment that was there that followed her.
I was born in 1906 into a comfortable Jewish family in Germany. Carl and I were married in December 1926. We finally woke up to the truth, that we would all have to leave Europe as soon as possible.
She was catatonic. She wouldn't talk and she wouldn't eat. And then one morning, I heard her say, "I've decided to live."
I fell in love with the bustle of New York.
And then I fell in love.
One evening, my 11-year-old grandchild Anna looked at me and said, "Irmi, you must have had an interesting life."
Sometimes my feeling in New York, always the feeling of being totally alone, you know, when I first came here. It's still with me there. No matter, do I have kids or whatever, that part, somewhere like right now, feel completely like a stranger. Like I don't belong here. And how am I going to connect with my experience and with these people? That's the reason I chose the theater and film, because I felt there it didn't hurt me back. I could protect myself, that I could give everything. Real creativity is a subconscious process, and sometimes don't know what you've done. You need someone to see what the subconscious part was. I haven't felt this in a long time, this strangeness of not being able to connect on a certain level. When I go to Germany with all the survivors, I feel open and free. And
Once a man bundled up all his stories and locked them away. They took revenge, became poisoned fruit, scalding water, red-hot iron, a tangle of snakes. They had to be killed with a sword.
To keep a person behind barbed wire for 2.5 years, this time of my life was robbed, was taken away.
هناك تفاوت بالمأساة ومن سمع ليس كمن رأى.
The Canadian Provo Corps brought up machine guns and surrounded the shed.
We thought that it was the luckiest thing that could have happened, to come to a country like this, which was obviously removed from the war forever.
When the Christian community speaks about what they think is going to happen and what they envision as a Jewish person, I relate to 99% of it. But the end is different.
Every nation that has blessed Israel, God has blessed them. And every nation that has opposed Israel, God has been in opposition to them.
I know that's a strong word to use, indoctrination, but that's where it starts.
The Apostle Paul said Jesus will come back to the Holy Land. And that's what the evangelicals believe, and they want to support it.
Christians have given through us $1.4 billion to help Israel and the Jewish people.
American evangelicals are a voting bloc of 25% of the American population. Wouldn't we expect to be better represented in government?
Jerusalem is where Messiah will come and establish a kingdom that will never end.
Today we officially open the United States Embassy in Jerusalem, the capital the Jewish people established in ancient times.
We don't believe that Palestine is a place on God's map. That's not evangelicalism. That's fact of history.
The State Department was so afraid to move our embassy to Jerusalem, but to us was a very important signal in prophecy. We've been waiting for that to happen for decades.
So now we're watching end time signs for the second coming of Christ. There's going to be great tribulation in Israel. There's going to be an end time battle, the Battle of Armageddon.
President Trump isn't supporting Israel because of the Jewish community, he's supporting it because of his evangelical followers. This isn't about money. This is bigger than this. This is a strategic partnership of God.
Hi, everyone. My name is Joshua Moore. I'm programmer for JFI, the Jewish Film Institute, and presenters at the San Francisco Jewish Film Festival. And welcome to our panel here at Sundance called How to Complete a Film During a Pandemic. I'd like to thank everyone at the Sundance organization for having us. And thank you to all of my guests for joining us here today. We all know that 2020 was a really challenging and rough year for everyone, also for filmmakers. So it was really with great pleasure that JFI was able to launch our inaugural completion grants funding program last year, which was awarded to 6 recipients. And my guests with me here today were all recipients of this program, and they're going to be speaking with us today about their trials and tribulations of making a film, completing a film during a pandemic. And I wanted to let everyone know that the applications for our 2021 Completion Grants Program opens January 29th. So if you're a filmmaker in post on a film working with Jewish themes and you have a rough cut, please go onto jfi.org and submit. So let's meet our panel. We have Nate Lavey from his project, Those Who Heard and Those Who Saw. Welcome, Nate. Maya Zinstein, Till Kingdom Come. Thank you for being here. A.B. Troen, Till Kingdom Come. Veronica Selver and Susan Fanchel from ERMI. Nancy Bursky, A Crime on the Bayou. Anika Benkoff, The Binding of Itzhak. And Tessa Louise Salome, The Wild One. Welcome, everyone. Okay, so to start, I'd like just everyone to just briefly tell us a little bit about your project. So let's start with ERMI, Veronica and Susan. Tell us a little bit about ERMI.
ERMI was my mother, and Susan and I together made a film about her. She had a story that fit into 20th century Jewish history. She was someone who was born and brought up in Germany. She was born in 1906. She had a comfortable upbringing, and then came Hitler and came the anti-Semitism. By then she was married. She and her husband and son fled to Holland and had another child there. And while they were fleeing Europe, she lost her family. They fled on a boat that was to take them to Chile, and the boat was mined by a German mine, and she lost everything. And she started her life over, and I am a product of that rebirth, so to speak. And so Susan and I made a film about her, and Susan and I have been the dearest of friends since high school. So Susan knew my mother quite well, and it's a personal film, of course. It's an intimate film, I'd even say, but it has resonance. And just to say one thing, which is that we are going to be showing at the New York Jewish Film Festival this upcoming week. So we're very pleased about that.
Okay, Nate, tell us a little bit about Those Who Heard and Those Who Saw.
Yeah, my project is a film essay film that's told in a sort of experimental way, uses sort of different aesthetics and techniques from more experimental tradition. And the core of the story is about a network of internment camps that were built in Canada in the 1940s to imprison Jewish refugees who had escaped from Europe and were interned in England and then sent to Canada to work in these labor camps for a number of years. And I was lucky enough to get access to a set of oral history tapes that were made in the 1970s with survivors of these camps. And so I sort of pair that audio with visuals of what the camps look like now, which is to say they don't look like very much because there's no memorials, there's no markers for the most part that suggest that these camps ever existed. The one thing that is present at some of the camps are the nearby presence of Syrian refugees who've arrived in Canada in the past 10 years and who are sort of like making their lives anew. And so the film puts these two refugee stories sort of in context and in conversation with each other, not necessarily drawing parallels or calling the experiences the same, but showing how these different refugee experiences separated by 70 or 80 years might inform each other, both inform contemporary discussion about migration politics in North America, and as well our understanding of what happened in the 1940s in Canada, which at that time was a deeply conservative and xenophobic place that probably had the worst record of all Western refugee receiving countries during the Second World War. And to that end, there is, as there is in the United States, a sort of resurgence of far-right activism that has targeted Muslims that bears many similarities to the anti-Semitic and sort of proto-fascist elements in Canada in the 1940s. So that's what the film's about.
Thank you. Annika, tell us about The Binding of Isaac.
All right, Anika, is it me?
Oh, Anika, my apologies.
Sorry, I just wanted to make sure it's the right person. Oh my God, these projects are all so cool and interesting. Mine is The Binding of Isaac is a short narrative film. It's about a middle-aged Hasidic bookbinder who is looking for bookbinding materials online, and he stumbles across a Craigslist ad offering binding lessons for submissive women and decides to respond to it. And he impersonates this character named Serena and becomes involved in a very intense emotional BDSM relationship with a stranger on the internet. And it's basically about the kind of the early messy phases of figuring yourself out in modern life as we do kind of on the internet or like stepping outside of our comfort zone, and about a person who's kind of like taking the first steps towards figuring out their gender and sexuality through the strange world of the internet. I'm a non-binary Jewish filmmaker, so that's my kind of connection to the material, but I really wanted to write it for my roommate, Ellie Rosen, who we live in Yiddish place together. And he's a really talented actor, and I just really wanted to write something like a good role for him to play. And we shot it all in our house, and so it had really good, we got really lucky with production value, and it's been really wonderful.
Thank you. Tessa, tell us about The Wild One.
Hello. My project is a film about a Jewish little boy that was born in Czechoslovakia in the 1930s and was deported with all his family during the Holocaust in Auschwitz. And while he was arriving in Auschwitz, when he arrived in Auschwitz, he lost all his family. And he was by himself. And he developed acting technique to survive in the camps. And he was he survived 11 concentration camps, and 20 years later, he created the Actors Studio West in Hollywood. So this is the story. And
Nancy, tell us about your film, A Crime on the Bayou.
Yes, thank you. My film is the third in a trilogy of films that deal with little-known civil rights stories and uplift little-known heroes of the era, people who were not activists or trying to change history, but were responding to something really inhumane happening to them. It started with The Loving Story, which is about an interracial couple who end up being banished from their home because they married a black woman, an Indian woman, and a white man in Virginia in 1958, and they take their case to the Supreme Court. And turn and reverse all the anti-miscegenation rules in the country. The second one is called The Rape of Recy Taylor, and it's about a African-American woman in 1944 who's gang raped in Alabama. And she does not get justice with the law. This third one is the story of a black teenager, 19-year-old black teenager in Louisiana, who gets arrested for touching a white boy's arm. What's central to the story is the allyship that he forms with a Jewish lawyer, a young Jewish lawyer, who's in Louisiana to deal with civil rights cases. And they too end up taking their case to the Supreme Court. I was very fortunate that we had already done production when the pandemic struck. I'd been to New Orleans a couple of times, and we had most of the shooting that we were doing in the can, and we were also obviously relying on a lot of archival footage. So the challenge in finishing the film was basically editing remotely. We'd actually edited quite a bit of it. We had a rough cut. So we knew where the film was going, and my editor and I have worked together on 2 previous films. So we kind of had a shorthand, which made it easier, and we were able to actually look at Zoom and edit a lot on Zoom and transfer the film to Vimeo. And that included, mixing and color correcting, just working with really talented people who figured out how to get it done, with me observing and giving my 2 cents. But basically the story was there. And so much of the film was mapped out. And so I feel very fortunate to have had such a talented team to work with, and be able to finish the story.
Thank you. AB and Maya, tell us a little bit about Till Kingdom Come.
Hi, everyone. So happy to be here as part of the JFI panel. Till Kingdom Come is a documentary that Maya and I spent 3 years filming, following the unique alliance between Israel and the evangelical community, specifically in the United States. The story goes anywhere between a dynasty of pastors in rural Appalachia who are one of the largest supporters to one of Israel's greatest philanthropic organizations, the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews. And it follows the story all the way from Kentucky up to the White House and down to settlements and moving of the embassy in Jerusalem in Israel halfway across the world. It gives a human portrait to some of the big questions that I think are facing both Israel and the United States in terms of church and state and the role that religion plays in politics.
So now I'd like to ask each person here, how did the JFI Completion Grant help you, and what advice do you have for someone who's seeking to finish their film right now during, still obviously we're going through, a very difficult time with the pandemic now. So let's go back to Veronica and Susan.
Well, I'm thinking about finishing the film because Veronica and I live in 2 different coasts. Veronica's in Oakland and I'm in New York City. And throughout the process of making the film, we were working already. We were sharing our work through the conveniences of the computers that we were able to share our editing process. But we always were getting together physically to really kind of move the film forward, because being in the same space was very meaningful. And I had just come back from a trip to California where we really had locked in our final process, and the grant sort of arrived at just around that time. And I was all scheduled to get back on a plane a couple of weeks later, and we had our mix and our online and all of the the final stages of the music record, all were kind of scheduled. And just at that point, that, I mean, literally days before I was supposed to get on the plane, California was the first to put a
Kabash.
yeah, what was it called?
Kabash.
Stay in place or shelter in place. And
Shelter in place, yeah.
and so really up until a day before I was supposed to leave, I was still debating whether or not I should just get on that plane and get there. And fortunately, I didn't, because everything would have been a disaster anyway. All the online, everything really stopped in terms of getting together to do the things that we always do to finish a film. And it was quite wonderful that somehow, because all of these things have developed, we were able to work with a colorist who lives in London. Our mixer was sending us sections of the film that he was pre-recording and mixing, and we were all kind of getting onto Zoom sessions and communicating that way. The composer was able to record the final track literally days before there was a lockdown. And so we kind of scooted under the wire to have the elements in place so that we could work off, online to complete the film. It did take quite a bit longer than it would have taken. And it was only an approximation of the benefits of working together in the same space, but we were able to manage to do that. And it was slightly miraculous from our point of view.
Sure. And what advice do you both have for a filmmaker who is looking to finish their film right now?
Well, one thing I would say is that we all know, all of us today in this, that technology is absolutely essential to the work we do. I think that's true for every single one of us, I would imagine. This Zoom is just one extension of that. So the advice that I would have is not so much advice as the one factor that is sort of, in a sense, intangible, but crucial, that's missing from all of this, is actually really the human factor. Being in the same place at the same time, being sort of in a three-dimensional space together, and is actually quite different, and adds an element that is missing from all of the ways in which the technology is allowing us to do our work. I don't know what advice that is, except to say that insofar as you possibly can, stay as much in touch as you can.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. Anything for you, Susan? Any
I'm
advice?
trying to think. I mean, we've all had to make decisions. I mean, decisions about showing our work, and that's been going on since we finished the film in July. Whether or not to wait to have a real audience. We've never had a live audience for our film. I've never seen it in a theater. I've never seen it in projection. I've always seen it in the limitations of home. So I don't think I have the perspective yet, other than, once you're in the momentum of finishing something, that one does that, rather than postpone it to some unknown time. But those are very personal decisions. I mean, and we're still coping with them.
Sure.
Still hoping that there will be a time that we can show this film with a live audience.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, as Susan and Veronica said, the grant was essential to the completion of this film. I used the money to hire a colorist and a sound mixer, and similarly worked mostly remotely with them. I'm fortunate enough to be in New York City and worked with a colorist who is in a post-production house that has a theater in their office. And so I was able to go into that theater and into that building essentially alone and watch a projection. And to Susan's point, I think, about seeing something projected, I think that's a really important and for me, key element of finishing a film. I've been shooting and editing this project for years, and I've seen it in a small 13-inch laptop screen for the majority of that time. And when I was shooting, I had made like certain creative decisions about cinematography that I thought would play better, on a wall as opposed to on a cell phone or on a computer screen. And it was, not only gratifying to see that on a large wall, but enabled me to sort of like see the film anew, right, where I establish a totally different sort of relationship to the images that I had captured over the years, because I could see them in this, much bigger way. The sound is much louder, not on just a pair of headphones or on my crappy little computer screen. And so, I think the thing that I would, suggest and encourage folks to do, and I know this is difficult, is to find ways, not necessarily to see it in a theater if that's not possible, but to find ways to experience and see your own projects in as many different environments as possible, to take them to, put them on a TV screen, put it on a different type of screen, watch it on your phone, get a little projector for your house, try it there, try it on as many different physical platforms as possible, because you see things and hear things differently in each room, in each display, that I think teaches you about your film in a way that perhaps wouldn't be evident if you just stay on the same screen for the entirety of the production. And then also to something that Susan and Veronica said, like, there's a community of filmmakers that I'm sort of a part of, and pre-pandemic, one of our practices was sort of like getting together and watching each other's materials and giving feedback on rough cuts. And obviously that's not really possible these days, but recently I attended a sort of like rough cut screening on Zoom, where we all sort of tuned in. There was maybe 12 of us in a Zoom meeting. The director sent out a Vimeo link. We all left the Zoom meeting, watched the film, and then came back 90 minutes later and talked about it. And we're sort of able to recreate the experience of a intimate rough cut screening from the distances of our own living rooms. And obviously that's not ideal, but I think it's like the best we can do. So I'd encourage folks to take advantage of the options that we have in terms of like digital communication, and to do their best to like see and hear their projects in different environments if possible.
Yes, so I think for us, the grant was incredibly helpful for, we're in this position where this film actually started as a student film at Columbia. So it was shot with very small resources. The production value that we got was mostly from like being in a house that was like happened to be a really good set, and just like being friends, like we were all friends with these actors and production designers who just are incredibly talented. So they lent us that. But for post-production, like we really didn't have any resources to kind of match that level. So I think the grant was just super helpful in opening us up to this other level of post-production, being able to find like a good colorist and someone who could really handle like a professional VFX artist, particularly because we have a lot of interfacing with computer images. And it's one of those things where you can kind of.
Oh, it looks like you froze a little bit. Are you still with us?
Trade favors and.
Oh, there you are. You were freezing up a little bit. Yeah, okay. Now I can hear you.
Oh, so I was just saying we basically, it opened us up to this other level of post-production that we wouldn't have had access to. I will say it's been really slow, I think partly because everything is virtual, and we've been transferring all the files virtually and interfacing virtually with colorists and sound. And So I think that things just take longer to finish in a pandemic. And one of the really difficult things I think that I would say is kind of where my advice is like, there's a sense that there's an endless timeline or like a lack of structure in this current environment, I feel like. And one of the ways that like I've kind of like motivated us being able to finish or like get different levels done is like just like applying to festivals, even if we're not completely ready yet, because that gives us concrete deadlines. Like by this point, we have to be ready we have to have this out ready for this. And we've already been in like 12 festivals virtually. And we're going to be in another one in February, the Love Story Festival in England. It's going to be the 11th through 14th of February, if anyone wants to check it out. But so I would say like, it's really important to like finish and be like, make sure it's the best. But like, I also think there's like a value to not being too like holding everything so close to your chest or nitpicking to the extent where you don't ever share it or you don't ever feel like you're ready to start putting it out there and getting feedback and getting an audience and getting people to really interact with it. Because I think that's been the valuable thing about the pandemic is so many people are watching virtual festivals that we've just gotten so much more exposure than I think we would have if I had gone through a more traditional process and done this in person, possibly.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. Sometimes you might find a larger audience in a virtual screening than in a theater that maybe holds 100 people and there's 20 people there. So that's a great point.
Yeah. And you can just participate more too in like different places you couldn't go.
I started my film in when I met. When I told you my story, I didn't tell you on what is the name of the subject. The name of the person is Jack Garfine, and I met Jack Garfine in 2015. So it's been quite a long time that I started to shoot pretty right away when I met him. And the grant actually helped me finishing my editing, but not only this, it really helped me like morally, because this year was so hectic in terms of financing, but the thing that when JFI came in, it really helped me like give me courage to finish, because like 5 years for a film, I mean, a lot of people has been for 5 years on a documentary, but it's a long time, and I do kind of everything by myself. Okay, I have a crew, but I mean, I'm producing and I'm directing, so at some point you can I never lose face, but it's a good, it gives you more than just money, it just give you
like a moral boost. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And part of that, you had another question, right?
Yes. So what advice do you have for filmmakers that were in your position now?
Okay. When COVID came, I didn't finish shooting my movie. So it was really a problem. And if I can give an advice to filmmakers, it would be like to reinvent yourself. I mean, I had to change the story of my film, and I think it could. I mean, I took it really almost like something fun. I had to, so yes, I really think with a little you can really reinvent yourself.
I was going to say that obviously money coming in at that point was incredibly valuable for cash flow, for our moral, for the reassurance that we needed that the film spoke to you and had value. But there was another aspect to it too, and that was that what I didn't get a chance to explain earlier is that this film was incredibly timely. The kind of villain in our film was a white supremacist, a despot who ruled Plaquemines Parish, Louisiana, like a fiefdom. And he was the person who was responsible for not only arresting Gary Duncan, the African-American teenager who was central to our case, but also arresting the Jewish lawyer who took on this case. So we were talking about systemic racism, we were talking about anti-Semitism, we were really taking us back to the 60s, where there are roots to what we're looking at today. And we actually had a figure, a man named Leander Perez, who was so Trump-like, it was chilling. He created a prison surrounded by barbed wire, where he was going to put all activists and people who were coming down to Plaquemines Parish to register voters. Not unlike the idea that Trump had at one point of putting people on some island and surrounded by crocodiles and everything. I mean, he actually said almost exactly what Leander Perez had said and predicted in the 60s. So we felt this urgency to get this film out. I mean, people think that civil rights stories are evergreen, and in many ways they are. They should last for a long time, and they should have that kind of educational value that we hope we're communicating. But this one was just so timely and scarily relevant that your grant helped us move it forward, and not just wait and not just say, okay, we'll wait for a bit more. Well, we're sure we'll bring in more money in a little while. We did the color correcting on a dime. We did the mixing. We made deals with people to allow us to mix and kind of put off some payments. So, you know, we were basically able to finish as a result. And I agree with Veronica and Susan. We applied to festivals. We gave ourselves deadlines. But again, the deadline was not just an arbitrary one. It was inherent in the story. The story, the content of the story forced us to move it forward because we just couldn't afford to wait.
And what advice do you have for filmmakers who are looking to finish right now?
Well, I think that what we went through is kind of a cautionary tale, and that is that, you know, as much as it's tempting to wait until you have everything in place and you have all the technology ready to use and the people that you always wanted to use, to be able to go work with them in person, I think you have to take a hard look at the story itself and think to yourself, how important is it to get the story out there now? What does it say to people who are going through what we all went through over the last 4 years? And I guess that's the most important lesson that I learned, that as tempting as it was to hold off and maybe create a better environment to finish it in, it was really important to push it forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Nancy.
Well, also, first of all, to say, hearing everyone's projects, like I cannot wait to watch everyone's movies. And to follow up on what Nancy was saying, it's funny, our final shoot date was 1 year ago, and that was the Trump peace initiative, or the deal of the century, which somehow has been forgotten by so many other things that have happened since then. But that was kind of the exclamation point where we realized, all right, the story is done. The proof is in the pudding about, again, the evangelical involvement in what's happening in Israel, between Israelis and Palestinians, and any notion of peace. I think we were fortunate that that was our exclamation point, because again, 1 month after that was the pandemic, and we were sort of forced rapidly to kind of navigate what the story would be, and as Nancy said, to get it out now. The JFI completion grant came in exactly at the right moment. And really it allowed us, you know, to finish making those tweaks in the edit and get the story just right, which in a film like ours, well, for obvious political reasons, was a delicate process, I'll put it that way. And specifically since the story is told through characters within the world, both evangelical pastors and Jews who work with them, you know, getting their voices fine-tuned was something that took a beat. And the completion grant allowed us to do that. And it also pushed us into post and to pay for sound design with our sound designer, Michael Gurevich, and composer Miriam Cutler, who is amazing. And we are forever grateful for that. Regarding the question of what's it like, advice that we'd give to others, Well, first of all, I would say that one additional thing that the JFI gave us was kind of a encouragement in a time when, you know, finishing any film is something that is scary, and putting those deadlines, as other folks have said, is it good? It's sort of hard to gauge that when you're sitting in your living room, and getting that sort of stamp of approval helped us feel more confident in the work that we've been doing for 3 years. I would say, you know, yeah, I would say it's really hard to know when to stop, and when to say this is the movie. And I would say getting people who you trust and appreciate to help make those judgment calls is very, very important. And I would say, just specifically about getting a film out during the pandemic, it has been a very strange experience. It has been a magnificent experience in the sense, like the pros, as one anecdote, we've had panels at festivals from our living room sitting with a nice button-down shirt and pajama pants with anywhere from a Palestinian activist to an Orthodox Jew. It was an advisor in the Bush administration. And kind of the ability to participate in a conversation with people so different and yet just stay in the confines of your home is something very, very special. Not let alone audiences that we've also, you know, again, from our living room, sometimes in the same day, have spoken to audiences with very different vantage points, with many different questions. And we were just able to do that in a pace that we would not have been had we needed to fly to, you know, to Texas or Warsaw or Jerusalem in the span of the same day. Yeah, I can take it from here.
Yes, I want to talk about the JFI support, but from slightly different angle, because I think that the support goes much beyond the money, which is always important. But I think it kind of brings you within a community, and it's actually also connected to my advice, and it's the outreach. I think especially in the times of pandemic, when you're releasing your film in this virtual world, you need very good allies that will help you to push it and to find its audience. And I think in that sense, not the pandemic, but the virtual world is also opens a lot of opportunities. And in that sense, I think JFI and Sundance that hosting us, which also gave a grant to this film, and it's the second grant that Sundance Institute gives to my film. And I know that the idea of communities is something that is so important when you in the filmmaking. So I think JFI, alongside with the money, yeah, we know that we can use this, not use, I don't know if you use, but to be supported by the network that the JFI brings. And I think it's crucial. And I think the idea of outreach is something that I think it was really important before the pandemic world, but I think today it's actually becomes to be a very important tool, because again, you don't really have a theatrical release and then you have an outreach. Everything is mixed and everything is kind of happens on the same time. The festivals, the outreach, the theatrical, and in a certain level, it's also good, because then you're trying to create this wave, and this is also my advice, to try to attack it from every possible angle, because to create this visibility to the film and to make that and to start a conversation. And because so many films in here are dealing with such a timely topics and important and tackling such an important issues, I think the outreach idea, which is again connected to the support of JFI, is something that I feel that in these days, this is a really important tool to use and to explore, and actually to push the film and take out the message that the film is carrying.
Thank you. Well said. I wanted to end on one last question for everyone. You know, we've had to adjust to so much during this time, and I'm curious to hear from everyone about how this pandemic has really changed you as a filmmaker primarily. I guess two questions, that, and then how has it changed you as a filmmaker, and how is that preparing you for the next film? Like, what is it about this time that's maybe made you reevaluate your filmmaking techniques and styles, and how are you learning from it? So I'm just going to open that up to everyone. So whoever feels like sharing, feel free to unmute yourself and share.
I actually just finished shooting a pandemic film. I'm in Boston right now with my brother, and he is like a young cinematographer. So we kind of took the opportunity to make just like a two-person crew film since we were quarantining together. I think it's really hard as like a writer to kind of like adjust to the post-pandemic reality. Like my brain, when I think of story ideas, is still thinking about life before the pandemic. I think I'm kind of in denial. So I think that that's going to be an evolving journey, like seeing where we all come out on this. And it's like hard because you feel like you're part of this weird historical shift, but you have no idea what it means yet. Or like how you're supposed to feel about it. So I feel like really just like, I think a lot of the writing and directing I've been doing since the pandemic is just kind of like more of a document of my own processing of like what it's like to be in quarantine and what it's like to really, you know, it's a weirdly reflective period of time, I feel like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, reflective, I think, is a key word for sure. Anyone else?
I think that in a funny way, everything's become more intense. My relationships with people are more intense. They seem to, everybody talks about this, that, you know, friendships, family, we seem to dig deeper into our lives together. We're more honest with each other, and more kind of empathetic about what we're suffering through, whether it's just existential or physical. And in a funny way, it's made me make choices in my life that feel more essential. You know, I miss the company of people. I miss going to screen. I'm in New York, and one typically goes to a lot of screenings where one sees friends and other filmmakers. So I miss that, but it's been replaced by much closer, deeper relationships. And it's also afforded me more time. I mean, I've been thinking more about what I want to do. I've been working on a couple of scripts. I think that the time, the isolation has, you know, generated some of that as well. So I can't wait for this to be over, but I'm not sorry that I've had this time.
Nicely said.
Maybe I'll be a devil's advocate in terms of that, only to, which is not so much as a filmmaker, although as a filmmaker, I've really come to appreciate the gifts of technology and what they're able to give us and what we're able to do in relative isolation. I think that's been a real eye opener for me. Partially because I started so long ago. You know, I started on upright moviolas, that sort of thing. So this entire new world, which is still new to me, was deepened by the pandemic and by the isolation that we all have. I've been sort of struck, and I don't know how long this will last, by how, I wouldn't say comfortable, but easy it's been to withdraw. Just feel that as a person who had a sort of a busy social life, you know, going out for supper with friends, and I've found the withdrawing of that quite easy, and I am curious to know what will stay of that and what will regenerate of previous social connections and encounters. So I've been perplexed at how easy the isolation has been.
Thank you for sharing that. Anyone else like to comment on how this time has really changed them as a filmmaker? I think, Tessa, you said something that I found very interesting, that it allowed you the opportunity to think about reinvention. And I'm wondering if anyone else had that experience as well.
I think, well, I don't know if it's affected me as a filmmaker, because all this time of pandemic, I mostly was in post and working until Kingdom Come, and then on the release of that. But I think it's such a, it's really to think how we're making lemonade from lemons.
Right.
And you're forced to be creative in so many levels, and to say, okay, everything that I know, all this structure almost that we got used to it, right? Of you're making a film, you're trying to go to a festival, and then you're rolling. It's all just turns upside down, and things that we took for granted suddenly are totally changed. And I think it's interesting because, as I said before, in a way it opens a new kind of ways of releasing your film. And it's mostly pushes you to be really, really creative in that sense, and think out of box. Things that, you suddenly find yourself doing things that you would never think before, just on the way of how to take your film out. That's something that, yeah, that's my main experience, I guess, from this from this year. Yeah, and I think there's many of things that kind of new for us today. They're going to stay, and kind of live alongside with the, hopefully, the physical world that hopefully will come back. So yeah, I think it's almost it's mainly showed me that we constantly need to be able to change and adjust ourselves to a new reality.
I agree. I think all of you are proof that, something positive can come out of this pandemic. You're the proof that you've completed your films, you've worked on something creative, and you've released it to the world. So I hope everyone viewing this is inspired to do the same thing. So thank you all so much for your time today. I encourage everyone watching to seek out these projects. They're all fantastic, and it's been a pleasure speaking with all of you. Take care, everyone. Be well.
Thank you, Josh.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, our pleasure. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Is it, I have a question posed.
Sure.
Is it possible to see, okay, so two questions. One, is there any way to watch everyone's films?
Yeah,
I would love to. It all just sounds so great. So
I would be so down.
Yeah. Do you guys have all of the your each other's email contacts from the messages that I've sent out?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I would just encourage everybody to to email each other, and if you want to share your work, do so.
Okay. And the second question is, this panel will be like, where will it be presented? How do we find it, promote it?
Yeah, I'll put everybody in touch with Jamie, our marketing manager. He's the contact for the promotional aspect of it. But from my understanding, it's going to be playing in the Sundance panels section of the program, and it'll be available throughout the whole festival. So it's not just a tune in, a specific time to watch it. It'll be up through the entire festival, which is great. So yeah, please tell, your networks, loved ones, family, friends, everyone, to watch it. Any other questions before we go? And everybody else, if you don't have any questions, please.
I have a question.
Go.
Yeah. This is just completely spontaneously in response to listening to all of this. I was wondering if in the course of our panel being made available on Sundance, whether you could make the trailers for our films available on Sundance, because of course, our films are not being shown on Sundance, but if people were wanting to just have a taste of what these projects were, rather than our verbal descriptions, if they could, just watch a few minutes of the films that.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I'm not sure what Sundance's rules are for their website. We can ask, and I think if they, for whatever reason, aren't able to do that, then at the very least we could put it on our website, because we're going to be advertising the panel as well. So I think that's a great idea.
Okay.
How do we pursue it?
No,
I'll pursue it.
Not for us.
Yeah, yeah, I'll take care of that.
I have one final question. Where are you, Tessa?
Sorry, I'm in Paris.
Okay. And what about Abraham?
I'm in Culver City, California at the moment, in LA.
It's not like super dark where you are.
No, this is, yes.
Everybody else we've sort of figured out, or they told us anyway.
Right. And
Okay.
Maya, you're in Israel, right?
Of course.
Yes, I'm in Tel Aviv.
Yeah. Thank you for joining us at night.
Oh, it's not so late. It's just 9 p.m. That's fine.
Yeah. Well, thanks everybody. I really appreciate you giving the time to do this. I think it went really well, and hopefully, people will be inspired by what you've all achieved. So, thanks.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. It really was a bright spot the whole grant
good.
during this period. So thank you so much for all of it.
Thank you.
Yeah, our pleasure.
Thanks a lot.
All right.
Bye.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.